I didn't plan to come. I told my CO I had a family commitment, which was technically true, though commitment felt generous for a night I'd spent my whole life dreading. The ballroom at the Emery Hotel glowed under crystal chandeliers, the kind that turn everyone's skin the color of champagne. I stood at the back in a plain navy dress, the one that doesn't wrinkle in a go bag, and watched my father hold court at the head table like a small-town mayor on election night. "Clara," the maitre d' asked, hovering with a practiced smile, "would you like to join the family table?" I shook my head. "I'm fine here." Fine, a word soldiers say when something is on fire far away from civilians. Up front, Dad's laugh traveled across clinking glasses and centerpiece peonies. "Our Daniel," he boomed, clapping my nephew on the shoulder as if he just clinched a Super Bowl. "Regional operations at 27, corner office, company car. That boy is going places." He raised his flute like a baton and then, almost as an afterthought, tilted it toward me. "And Clara, well, Clara works in an office too. In the army, you know, paperwork, schedules, important in its own way." A few polite chuckles, the social lubricant of well-meaning strangers. Someone whispered, "Is she the one who never married?" Another voice, "I heard she moves a lot. Admin stuff." My jaw did its old drill sergeant lock. In the mirror over the bar, my face held steady, the way it does when mortar thumps in the middle distance. Inside, something hot uncoiled. An old, familiar heat that started when I was 18 and Dad missed my West Point acceptance day to drive my brother to a JV baseball game. The same heat from the night I pinned on silver oak leaves and Dad told the waitress, cheerful as pie, "She's kind of like a military secretary." 2 tables over, Aunt Ruth fluttered a hand at me. "Clara, honey, come say hi." She patted the seat beside her. "Tell us about your what-do-you-call-it base." "It's a post," I said, because words matter. "Fort Benning." She leaned in, breath sugar thick with wedding cake. "And you do the schedules? Must be so organized." She tapped her temple approvingly as if I color-coded pens for a living. My mouth offered a civilian smile. My hands remembered the shape of a rifle. A string quartet launched into At Last, and the wedding planner's headset chirped with battlefield urgency. Cake in 30, toast in 45, first dance in 8. It was all choreography, all pre-written. I could respect a plan, I just hated my part in it. My phone buzzed once in my clutch, silent, persistent. A secure text, no preview. I didn't need to read it to know the sender. People think the Army only calls in disasters. They don't understand the 1,000 decisions that come before disaster, or the single decision that prevents it. I slid the phone back, felt the weight of 20 years settle where my shoulders are strongest, and watched my father adjust a tuxedo he didn't quite fit. He tapped his glass with a knife. The room slowed. Waiters froze at the edges like chess pieces. Dad cleared his throat, the same performative rasp he used for booster club speeches and church announcements. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich with borrowed authority, "tonight we celebrate success." He turned to Daniel, who preened, golden as a magazine ad. "This young man is the kind of story that makes a father proud, smart, steady, practical, a planner." He let the word land, "gets things done." He pivoted toward me, smile tightening like a man about to gently mock a shy relative on local radio. "Now my daughter Clara, she took a different path." He chuckled for the audience. "The Army, we're very proud, of course, it's stability, good benefits. She organizes the what-do-they-call-it logistics." He spread his hands, palms up, the universal signal for you get the idea. "Somebody's got to keep the trains running, right?" The heat moved to my throat. I tasted metal. If I'd been in uniform, I'd have had a ribbon rack to hide behind, a chest full of nouns that meant something to men like him. Out of uniform, I was just a woman in a dress that could disappear into any crowd. The guests did what guests do. Nodded, smiled, appeased the narrative. A man in a rental tux across the aisle gave me a thumbs up he thought was supportive. His wife, lovely and chiffon, said, "Thank you for your service," in the tone you use for a flight attendant who hands you extra peanuts. My nephew's new in-laws glanced at me with the soft, benevolent pity reserved for people who chose the difficult life. No one asked what I actually did. No one ever did. That was the point. They'd already written me a part. And every time I opened my mouth, the orchestra swelled so they wouldn't have to hear the wrong song. Dad lifted his chin, riding the room's attention like a wave he didn't earn. Success, he said, drawing the word out, is about providing, about making the right choices, about being there for family. He paused, let the triangle of implications gleam. Some careers are adventures. A little smirk, but some of us grow out of that. I could have let it pass. I had let it pass. For 2 decades I'd swallowed it down and called it discipline. But something about the chandelier light glinting off 1,000 cut crystal edges, sharp, merciless, honest, made me step forward into the aisle before I knew I'd moved. From here, the room was a map. Tables like grid squares, exits like rally points, sightlines clean. Dad's eyes flicked to me, briefly annoyed at the interruption to his speech. The annoyance told me everything. To him, I was a stray violin in his symphony of himself. I stopped beside the nearest table, steadied my voice the way I'd steadied radio comms under rotor noise. "Dad," I said, and my tone cut through the soft laughter like a whistle on a parade field. Heads turned. Forks hovered midair, the quartet faltered and died. I smiled without warmth. "May I add a footnote to your definition of success?" The question hung, polite as a bayonet wrapped in velvet. From somewhere near the bar, a TV above the shelves cycled past a muted news crawl, footage bright with desert light, a helicopter's rotor wash blooming dust like a storm. No one noticed it yet. The music had stopped, the story had not. Dad blinked, surprised, then recovered the way he always did when a fact collided with his version of events. "Of course," he said, magnanimous. "Tell them about your office. People love to hear how things get organized." A laugh rippled, thin, brittle. My phone buzzed again in my palm, a simple vibration with the gravity of an earthquake. I let it pass. The room wanted a secretary. It was about to meet a soldier. I stepped forward into the light. The silence after my words hung longer than it should have. Guests shifted in their chairs. The string quartet fiddled with sheet music, pretending they hadn't lost the rhythm. My father raised his glass again, clearing his throat as if to reassert control. But something had shifted. The eyes of the room, even if only for a moment, had turned toward me, not the dutiful daughter in a dress, not the office worker in uniform, but something else they couldn't yet name. I sat back down, though every muscle in my body screamed to leave. My place card at a far-off table bore only my first name, Clara. No rank, no title. Just Clara, as if the 20 years I'd spent leading troops in missions were no more important than someone who'd once volunteered at the PTA bake sale. I lifted my water glass and caught my own reflection. The dress made me look softer than I felt, like the version of myself my father always preferred, quiet, domestic, palatable, yet my hands betrayed me. The faint scars along my knuckles, the calluses at the base of my fingers told another story. I could still feel the grip of my rifle, the cold steel of a Humvee door, the vibration of a helicopter skimming a ridge line in the Hindu Kush. Those memories were tattooed under my skin, invisible to everyone in this room. As Dad droned on about Daniel's new mortgage and company car, my mind drifted to the desert. The taste of grit in my teeth, the smell of diesel and dust. 6 weeks ago, I stood in a forward operating base in northern Syria, briefing a dozen young officers before a night raid. Their faces had been tight with nerves. They were barely older than Daniel. I told them what my commander once told me: fear sharpens you, but it doesn't define you. Hours later, we breached a compound, rescued civilians, and brought every soldier home alive. Not that my father ever knew. He'd called once while I was still overseas. His voice half proud, half dismissive. "Your brother's doing well, promotion on the horizon, and you, well, you're still out there chasing shadows, huh? When will you come home and settle down?" I'd answered the way I always did. "Soon, Dad." But soon never came, because the army has a way of owning your calendar, and the world has a way of never running out of crises. The MC's voice jarred me back to the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, dessert will be served shortly." Waiters moved in formation, silver trays gliding, sugar and cream perfuming the air. All around me laughter swelled, easy and unearned. I was a ghost in my own family celebration. Then came the sting I knew was inevitable. Dad's toast turned from praise to comparison, and his gaze locked on me like a spotlight. "My Clara," he said, voice booming over clinking forks. "She's taken a different path, moved around a lot, never stayed put, never gave me grandkids." A sympathetic murmur rippled through the tables. He chuckled, shaking his head. "But she's found her place, haven't you, honey? Doing paperwork for the army. It's good, honest work." The burn in my chest flared. Paperwork, that was the word he chose to summarize 2 decades of sweat, scars, and sacrifice. Paperwork for the army. My phone buzzed again, harder this time. I slipped it from my clutch, thumb covering the screen. A secure message blinked up from my XO. Ma'am, CNN just aired footage. Operation Iron Shield credited to your command. Congratulations. My heart jolted, of course, tonight of all nights. The operation I'd planned for 18 months, the one that had kept me awake in bunkers and safe houses, was making headlines. And here I was being reduced to a glorified secretary in front of 200 wedding guests. The irony was almost cinematic. On television screens across the country, I was Colonel Clara Morgan, the architect of a mission that had dismantled a terrorist network. In this ballroom, I was just Clara, the daughter who never measured up. I slid the phone back into my purse, my pulse thundering. Around me, guests chatted and laughed, oblivious to the storm that had just broken beyond these four walls. My father raised his glass again, ready to define success for everyone in the room. I clenched my hands in my lap, nails biting into my palm. A decision began to take shape, sharp and inevitable. For 20 years, I'd kept my silence. For 20 years, I'd let him tell the story of who I was. Not tonight. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the staff wheeled in the wedding cake, a towering confection draped in sugared roses. Guests gasped and applauded, phones lifted to capture the moment. My father, drunk on attention as much as champagne, tapped his glass again. Success, he declared, his voice carrying like a preacher's, is about stability, about making choices that lead somewhere. Some people chase adventure, but adventure doesn't build a family. It doesn't keep food on the table. His eyes flicked toward me, a familiar smirk curling his mouth. Some of us learn that, some of us don't. Laughter scattered like glass beads across the floor. My chest burned. I pressed a palm against the tablecloth, steadying myself. My phone buzzed again, relentless this time, as if the universe itself refused to let me swallow his words. Turn on the TV in the lobby, the message read. For Martinez, direct, urgent. I rose quietly, slipping into the corridor lined with framed oil paintings of magnolias. The hotel bar stretched ahead, low-lit and hushed compared to the ballroom's noise. Above the shelves of bourbon bottles and imported scotch hung a massive flat screen tuned to CNN. And there it was. A news anchor, grave-voiced. In a coordinated series of strikes across northern Syria, the U.S. military has dismantled a terrorist stronghold, rescuing dozens of civilian hostages. Operation Iron Shield is being called one of the most significant counterterrorism victories of the decade. Footage rolled, helmet cam clips, aerial shots of helicopters kicking up dust, columns of soldiers moving through breached walls. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, Operation led by Colonel Clara Morgan. My own face appeared next, a still photograph, official army portrait, hair pulled back tight, eyes steady, ribbons lined across my chest. A face the world was learning tonight, even as my own family barely knew it at all. I stood frozen, watching strangers at the bar react. One man muttered, "That's incredible." Another shook his head in disbelief at the scope of the mission. Not one of them knew the woman in the navy dress only a few feet away was the same officer on their screen. Clara? I turned. Aunt Ruth had followed me out, wine glass sloshing in her hand. She blinked at the television, then back at me. "Goodness, that's awful," she whispered. "All that violence. Thank heavens you're safe at your little desk job." She patted my arm kindly, utterly unaware that 3 weeks ago I'd been the one stepping out of that helicopter, barking orders over rotor thunder. Her words might have been comical if they didn't cut so deep. My throat tightened with the weight of silence. For 2 decades, I'd let this happen, let them believe I was ordinary because it was easier than trying to explain, because no explanation had ever been enough for my father. From the ballroom, I heard the muffled tap of a knife against crystal. Dad was launching into his grand toast, his sermon on success. Aunt Ruth tugged at me. "Come on, dear, he'll want you to stand beside Daniel." I followed her back in, my pulse hammering. Phones glowed around the room. Some guests had already seen the breaking news and were whispering to each other, eyes darting between the screen in their hands and the oblivious man at the head table. Dad lifted his glass, smiling as if the world belonged to him. "My son Daniel," he boomed, "is everything a father could want, a true success story." Applause broke out. Daniel blushed proud. Then my father turned to me, his smile tightening again. "And my daughter Clara, well, she's had her adventures. But you know, adventure doesn't build a life, not really." She keeps the army's files straight, I think. Important, sure, but not the kind of thing you dream of for your little girl." The words landed like fists. A ripple of discomfort spread through the guests. At the same time, I saw faces lighting up as phones refreshed with my name, my photo, my mission. Someone gasped audibly. Another whispered, "Is that her?" And just like that, the two versions of me collided, the invisible daughter in a navy dress and the colonel on national television. I rose from my chair, the scrape of wood against marble echoing through the sudden hush. My father faltered mid-sentence. Startled by my movement, every eye in the room turned toward me. It was time. The ballroom went silent, as if someone had cut the strings on the quartet mid-song. The only sound was the faint chime of silverware against abandoned plates. 200 faces turned toward me, their expressions caught between curiosity and discomfort. My father lowered his champagne glass, eyes narrowing. "Clara," he said, tone laced with irritation, "I'm giving a toast." I stepped into the aisle, the click of my heels deliberate, echoing off the marble floor. My voice carried clear, steady, the voice that once held under helicopter blades over gunfire across deserts. "Then let me correct something," I said. A ripple moved through the crowd. My father's confident smile twitched, then faltered. "Correct?" he asked, almost laughing. "Darling, I said you work in an office. That's nothing to be ashamed of." "I don't work in an office." My gaze swept the room, catching the wide eyes, the glowing phones where guests were already scrolling through headlines. "I am Colonel Clara Morgan. I've served this country in uniform for over 20 years. Murmurs surged like surf breaking against a seawall. A man at the front table glanced from his phone to me, then whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "She's on the news right now." I took another step closer to the head table. "I've commanded soldiers in combat. I've led missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. I've buried brothers and sisters in arms, and I've brought others home alive who wouldn't have survived without the choices I made. 3 weeks ago, I directed Operation Iron Shield, the raid you all just saw on television. That wasn't paperwork, that was my command." Gasps rippled across the room. Someone dropped a fork. Aunt Ruth clutched her pearls as though I'd confessed to sorcery. Phones rose higher, glowing screens illuminating astonished faces. My father's face drained of color. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish starved of air. He tried for a laugh, weak and brittle. "Clara, this is the truth." I cut in, my voice sharper now, the steel edge I used when subordinates questioned orders that meant life or death. "You said I never settled down, that I never built anything. You're wrong. I built teams. I built strategies that dismantled organizations bent on killing innocents. I built a career on protecting people you'll never meet but who get to live because my soldiers and I were there." The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the chandelier lights. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "Holy hell." I stopped just short of the head table, leveling my gaze on my father. "You said success is stability, that it's mortgages and company cars. That may be your definition. Mine is different. Success is saving lives. Success is putting your men on a bird at dawn and watching them walk back into the chow hall at night because you made the right call in the field. Success is serving something bigger than yourself." Chairs scraped as guests leaned forward. Daniel, my golden boy brother, stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. His new wife clutched his arm, eyes wide. I lifted my chin. "For 20 years I let you tell the story of who I am. Tonight I'm telling it myself, and I won't let you or anyone reduce me to a footnote in my own life again." The words hung heavy, irreversible. My father's champagne flute slipped from his trembling hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. No one moved. No one spoke. All that existed was the echo of broken glass and the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. The ballroom held its breath. 200 guests sat frozen, forks suspended, wine glasses trembling slightly in hands that weren't steady anymore. The only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier lights and the shards of crystal still skittering on marble from my father's dropped flute. He stared at me, face pale and stricken, as though the world had shifted under his feet and left him stranded on an unfamiliar shore. For once in his life, the salesman's charm, the booming voice, the easy jokes, none of it came to his rescue. I let the silence stretch, let every guest in that room feel the weight of what had just been spoken. Then I drew a slow breath and softened my tone, not the bark of a commander, but the voice of a woman who had carried this burden too long. I never told you what I really did, I said, scanning the room, because I wanted you to be proud of me for who I was, not just for what I accomplished. I thought maybe someday you'd see me as your daughter, not a resume to compare to Daniel's, not a disappointment to explain away at family gatherings, just your daughter. My gaze locked back on my father, his eyes glistened, but he said nothing. I was wrong, I continued, my voice clear and steady. And that's on me. I let you believe your version of me for 20 years. I thought silence would keep the peace. But silence only handed you the pen to write my story. Tonight, I'm taking it back. Across the room, phones buzzed. Guests were whispering, showing each other news alerts with my name flashing in headlines. Colonel Clara Morgan leads historic counterterrorism raid. Some gasped softly, others mouthed, "Oh my God," as they compared the woman in the navy dress to the uniformed officer on their screens. Daniel stood slowly, eyes wide with something between awe and shame. "Clara," he said, voice cracking. We had no idea." "No," I replied quietly. "You didn't because you never asked." That landed harder than I expected. A few guests winced. Someone at the back murmured, "Damn." I turned toward my father one last time. He looked small, hunched, his tuxedo suddenly too big for him. "You want to talk about success, Dad? Tomorrow morning, I'll be in Washington, briefing the Joint Chiefs on this operation. Next week, I'll testify before Congress about terrorist infiltration. The president knows my name, and I still sleep at night knowing I've done something that matters." I swept the room with my gaze, steady and unflinching. That's my definition of success, not a paycheck, not a mortgage, not a family photo you can brag about. Success is saving lives, it's protecting the innocent, it's standing for something bigger than yourself. The silence was absolute. Then from somewhere near the back, a single clap broke through. Another joined, then another, until the entire ballroom rose in a thunder of applause that shook the crystal chandeliers. Faces that had looked at me with pity an hour ago now stared with awe. Strangers nodded, mouths tight with respect. I didn't smile, not yet. I turned to Daniel and his new wife, who sat at the head table looking stunned. "Congratulations on your wedding," I said. "I hope you'll build something meaningful together." Then I turned, heels clicking against marble, and walked toward the doors. "Clara, wait," my father's voice, small, fragile. The room hushed again. I stopped but didn't turn. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For the first time in my life, it sounded like he meant it. I closed my eyes, drew in a breath. "I know," I said. Then I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the night. The cool air hit me like freedom. I pulled out my phone. 47 unread messages. Half from fellow officers, the rest from reporters. And one from Martinez, "Colonel, the president wants to meet you Monday. Hope you enjoyed the wedding." I laughed quiet, almost disbelieving, and slid into my car. As the engine turned over, I glanced once more at the glowing hotel behind me. For the first time in years, the burn in my chest was gone. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't a ghost in the family narrative. I was exactly who I'd always been: soldier, leader, protector. And finally, the world knew it too.